Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Vintage Books Live. We have switched over to Zoom after technical difficulties on Instagram. And I'm here tonight with Gwendolyn Morgan and William Erickson. They're both poets from Clark County, and we thought it'd be fun to have a couple of people representing that community during National Poetry Month. So I am going to start with Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn, you were poet laureate, and I'm going to forget the dates, but recently for Clark County. And I guess I'd start out with, how does that process work? I honestly didn't even know that we had such a thing until I started working at the bookstore. And so I'd be curious to know more about that.
Yeah, so I served as the second Clark County Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2020. And as we were talking previously, the last year was a year of the beginning of COVID, so really didn't do a whole lot. And it's really a place for poets in the community to lift up poetry across audiences across the county. So that was a real privilege of going from schools to actually did a writing workshop in a shelter for women and children who are houseless, with different community events, just lifting up poetry in a different way. And my own personal goal was to really reach out to communities where I knew people were reading or writing poetry, but that we weren't hearing from. And I didn't get as far as I wanted to. And so I passed that baton on to Armin to continue the good work. So he's another great poet in the community.
And hopefully we're going to, just so everyone is aware, we're hoping to do something similar with Armin in a couple months. He wasn't able to join us tonight, but hopefully in the summer. I'm just going to jump right in and start talking about the recent work. Gwen has a book coming out in a few days, but I'm going to jump to William because you had a new book come out in February, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And we have it in the store, just an aside. And I'm curious what I always ask authors, the like authors of novels and nonfiction pieces, like the origin stories of their books. So I guess we'll start with the same thing for you. Where was the origin story of that particular group of poems and it coming together into a chapbook and just how it came to be?
I have a very tempestuous relationship with that book. The poems, most of the poems in there are probably maybe anywhere from 6 to 10 years old, as of it's getting picked up. So, maybe push that back to like 8 to 12 years old now. And I had collected them as a larger collection, probably about 80 poems or so. But they really spanned a really long period of time. And I was like, what am I going to do with all these? Maybe I'll just shove them into a notebook and forget them, you know. But I found a sort of set of poems that had a lot of thematic cohesiveness to them, and there's maybe 40. And I was like, maybe I'll try and see if I can like throw this chapbook in a contest or a couple contests and kind of get it out there. Just kind of as a way to like move past it. And so I did that. I culled it down to like 30 poems or 35 or whatever it is, and tossed it in maybe 4 contests, and one of them was finishing line contest. And finishing line, they put out tons and tons of work. They're publishing books on a daily basis, and so I didn't win their contest, but they shortlisted it and decided to publish it. And it was, it's my first little book, so I wasn't going to say no. I threw it in their contest, whatever. Yeah, and so that's kind of how I arrived at it. But I look at a lot of the work now, and it seems like it's of a different person. And my poetry now is very, very, very different. And so, like, I can appreciate it as an aesthetic object that I made and I'm proud of it and stuff, but I kind of have a tendency to be very self-deprecating about it, and I feel like it's going to be, this sort of calling card that helps people to typify me as a writer, and then, they're going to grab my next book and be like, "What the hell is this?" You know, so it's funny,
Yeah.
and in the recent past, I did a reading with Birdhouse Books on the
Yeah.
1st of April, and I read a bunch of the poems from the book, and it was the first time in, I don't know, 7 or 8 years that I had read any of those poems in front of a group of people. And it was like I was reading someone else's poems, and I was like, yeah, whatever, this is cool, and it was
Yeah.
fun,
Yeah.
and people enjoy it. So I kind of ascribe to the theory that once I write the poems are dead and they're out there in the world and they're no longer mine and they belong to everyone else. And so it's been cool to see people enjoy it. Um, but I still kind of have that, like, I don't know, there's like a sort of cringiness to it, when I
Yeah.
think about it. I don't think I'm unique at all in
No, I
that
was going to
respect.
say, we'll have to circle back to that because I can relate to
Yeah.
that very much.
Yeah. So that's my very long origin
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
of Monotonies.
And Gwen, you've got a new book coming out in just a couple of weeks. And I'm wondering, you have some stuff out prior to this. So I'm wondering how this book came about for you.
Yeah. And before we move to that, I just want to say, William, I didn't think your poems aren't dead. They just take lives of their own, like pieces of art. So, yeah, look forward to reading them. I think that started with part of my writing was gratitude practices, and I've done that for a really long time. But I had some mini journals where I started writing just a couple of lines, and I thought I'm going to have a little short collection of gratitude poems. And then my work through working a lot with people at the end of life, and then with the pandemic, it was really a spiritual practice, an artistic practice of writing out all of life, and so it became a really different manuscript than what I had envisioned. Though there's a phrase throughout it that I have used in trainings and with people of gratitude enkindles light, and a grateful heart illuminates the space around it. But of really knowing, particularly in the world now, I mean, with the war going on in Europe, with all that's happening that we're not hearing about, that we carry the grief, we carry the gratitude um, at the same time. So that's where this really evolved from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And honoring people from around the world who don't have the privilege that we do of having roofs and running water and food and shelter, and people who care about us and who want to hear our poems. So
I think that's a perfect segue to, if you wouldn't mind reading Flight Feathers, because it does have some relevance to the idea of an international perspective too. So
yeah. And I'll just say, we still don't know what happened to all the children on the border, how many of them got reconnected with their families. It dropped off the major news. But now there are children around the world who are in a similar place.
yeah.
So flight feathers. We found a large flight feather, watched red-tailed hawk on a thermal lift. When it started to rain, we remembered. The mother told us they put an ankle bracelet on her when they separated her from her children at the border crossing. This is the same bracelets our government uses to track prisoners. Electronic surveillance, a way to monitor movement of undocumented. The mother shared that ICE kept her 2 children in cages for months. They treated us like animals, she wrote in a notebook. They confirmed my identity with facial recognition. We confirmed the identification of the hawk with Feather Atlas, a field guide to feathers from the forensics laboratory of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Is there, I mean, I think that there's probably some obvious connections as far as inspiration goes, but is there something that kind of pushed you to write about that issue particularly?
Having the honor of working with women who've been undocumented and who've had I've seen the ankle bracelets around their ankles and heard their stories. And so it's like many of my poems, it's a composite, a conglomerate of
Yeah,
many different
yeah.
stories. And again, even though these were Latina women from south of the border, they could be anywhere in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, of course, I think that birds of prey, hawks, eagles are messengers. They're carrying messages of the universe for us to listen to.
I really enjoyed the juxtaposition of that, the two images of the, well, and then there's freedom and confinement too, I think, with the flying and it was just, yeah, I really enjoyed all the images in there, even though they're obviously really hard to process. It just, I think for me, that's one thing that I appreciate about poetry is the ability to process hard things that need to be processed, but sometimes I think get stuck in our minds because we just can't move through what's happening because it's just so incomprehensible. And sometimes a poem can kind of move you to a different place where, prose or a news article just can't do that quite in the same way.
Yeah.
So, William, would you be willing to read that one?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then we maybe give you a chance to read something newer if you'd like to.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. This is the last poem in my book. Catechisms for a Different Day. One night the question lingered where the moon had first touched grass, the ocean light salty on its blades, and in the soil something of a premise or proposal, which in the circumstance was not unwarranted, but as well did not presuppose that there were answers. It was a randomness, the way a sky might look to those who hadn't spoken with the wolves at night, a scatterplot of seconds of a lifetime, sorted by the sounds of birds and the wisdom of one's mother in the moment it was catalogued. A greenness. Must the change come from a certain lack of pines across the forest floor? When the wood is flooded with a silence only heard by others, a mystery is proposed and it rests in the soft hands of sunlight on the other side that one can't see. Which is to say, the answers are yesterday and tomorrow. The song of a finch on the telephone wire who preens a conversation from the cable as it sings, which, like most things, means so much that it means nothing.
I think that was that last line that really got me when I was going through the book. And for both of you, it was like, I like all of these. How am I going to pick one? And I think for me, the reason I picked that one was especially because of that last line and everything and nothing. And you mentioned it's been a long time. And so this might be a question that you just have to say, yeah, I don't know. But was there something like, I think a poem and you put it out there and I think Gwen's right. It does become a piece that we all take and we add our own specific circumstances to, and we get something out of it that's different than what everybody else is going to get out of it. But is there something that you were kind of bringing to that line of everything and nothing?
I think it's funny. I think that you call out that line in particular because I think this idea of meaning being so malleable in art and in life and in events that it almost doesn't mean anything because the meaning is what you make out of your interpretation of it. I think I play with that idea a lot still. Um, And I think too, there's a lot in the poems in this book, and it's probably something that I still do, I think, intuitively when I write. Um, I tend to sort of emphasize the insignificance. That's kind of a weird double negative. I sort of de-emphasize the significance of um, maybe myself or the speaker in my poems. I tend to want to make everything bigger and more important than me. Um, and so I think a lot of the meaning that I make, my urge is to say that it doesn't mean anything when I say it, you know. Um, so I kind of, I don't know, I mess with that idea a lot, I think. And in retrospect, looking at this poem that I haven't written or worked with for a really long time, I think it seems a lot like that's sort of just my intuition,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
I
to
think
mess with
that
those
is the
things.
one fun thing. I I totally relate to the sort of ambivalence about one's own work because I have a tendency to I think a lot of times too, you tend to be, by the time something actually publishes, you tend to be on to something else. And so everybody else is all excited that you have something coming out and you're like, oh yeah, that thing. I'm not I'm not working on that anymore. So I can totally relate to that. But I think the one thing that is interesting is to go back as a writer and see what the through lines are, because even though you may look at something and the style or the way that it's worded or whatever might be really different now than it was then, your style or the way you deal with things, or just your ability to communicate gets better, hopefully. But there are through lines, I think, that we can see in our work, and that's pretty neat. So, well, I know that both of you are, Gwen, you said we got a chance to talk, just so the audience knows that there's a little bit of history. We were talking before we popped on and started recording, but so Gwen you mentioned that you're going through transition in your work life, but I'm curious about the balance, because most writers I know are probably working other jobs in addition to writing, and how that balance, how you find like maintaining a balance of giving time to your artistic practice versus either being at work or sitting on the couch after work and being tired of doing everything. How do you maintain an active artistic practice? I mean, possibly, Glenn, for you, like when you're dealing with all the stuff that you had to deal with in the last couple of years as someone in the medical community.
Yeah. I've had a morning journaling practice that sometimes will go into, some poetry or at least a few lines starting. And then I usually will close the day more with reading, maybe some writing, but a time to soak in the words of other writers. And have sustained that, and it sustains me, both. So yeah.
And William, I know you've got outside stuff too that you're doing. How does that work for you?
Um, it's always been sort of a struggle. I worked in the trades, doing glass for about 15 years. Um, and I actually found it a bit easier to develop and sustain a writing practice specifically when I was doing that, because it didn't take a sort of analogous mental energy during the
Mhm.
day,
Yeah.
and so my thoughts were sort of like, unspooling, right, as I'm working. And now I do communications and intellectual property writing for a tech company, and um, that really tends to fight with my practice, and it exhausts my my ability to sort of string together coherent words in sentences and things,
Yeah.
and it's fairly demanding. but I've found, I think, a balance in doing what I like to call kind of the poetry business sort of stuff. In the evenings during the weeks, I do my editing, I work on submissions, um, kind of do the nuts and bolts process sort of stuff, and then spend as much time as I possibly can every weekend just writing and writing and writing. And yeah, I pepper in all the reading that I can. I read pretty consistently for a couple hours at night before I go to bed. Take a lunch break, read a bunch of poems or whatever it is that I'm reading at the moment. So it works. It's not. I don't think that I write as much as I would like to be writing, but I don't know any writer I think who writes as much as they would like to be writing. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll jump back into the past, and I'm curious I'll start with you, Gwendolyn. What was the spark that led you to poetry versus maybe some other form of writing?
Mm. I've written across genres, but I think I'll think early sixth grade teacher for really encouraging poetry, and then teachers and professors and mentors throughout my life of bringing it back to just really lifting up poets when they weren't always honored, even in the literary community. So
That's very cool. What about
yeah.
you, William?
Oh, this is a funny and embarrassing thing to say, but when I was in high
You're
school,
not required to say anything embarrassing if you don't
oh
want
no,
to.
no,
Okay.
no. When I was in high school and shortly after high school, so this has been 20 some years ago, I got with a group of friends into rapping, and we had a rap group, and we play at parties and stuff like that, and it was really fun. And then after high school, and shortly thereafter, when I got into doing trade work, I kind of never really, like, I gave it up publicly. I would no longer do it like out loud in front of people to music, but I always was writing lyrics. And then when I made the move to go back to school in 2013, I went back to school originally. I was going to get a degree in nursing and go into nursing. And I discovered, or maybe I rediscovered, that I sort of had a penchant. I was a good writer, and also I really really enjoyed writing, and so kind of made that switch. And I wrote prose for a really long time. I wrote short little memoirs and was getting those published in journals. But they always had a very lyrical bent to them. And even the prose that I was writing in school, like critical theory pieces and things like that, were very, very lyrical. Um, and so I think it was just a really easy, thing. It's kind of always just been, you know, the thing that's the way that I process sentences when I write them down, I guess.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's always interesting how different people journey, into things, and it's all really different journeys. Um, let's see. I have a list. I think the one other thing, before we jump into a closing poem is, I know that a lot of times people who are aspiring writers end up watching sessions like this to kind of get, just inspiration or ideas. And I think poetry is, I think it feels a little bit mysterious, like even to someone like me who's in the writing world and, has seen it from, writer, editor, publisher, bookseller, like from all the different angles. Like if someone came up to me and asked me, what about poetry, like I'd have no idea what to tell them. And I'm just curious if you have some thoughts for someone who maybe is like, maybe that would be interesting. Or like, I don't know that there's a journey in the same way that is obvious as maybe, like somebody writing a novel. So I'd just be curious what you'd say to people.
William, I'll let you go first.
Oh no, I was gonna wait until I heard what you said. Um,
You're gonna
no,
end with the hard one, right?
I really relate to that because to this day, I find myself like in awe of and intimidated by poets all the time when they read, when I meet them, whatever. I get that mysteriousness, I think. And oh man, I don't know.
That's okay. I put you
Yeah,
on the spot.
yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, and I don't know. I just think that the thing that I appreciate, I think, about poetry and about poets is that they're never necessarily in it for a career in the typical sense of a career because nobody's making money writing poems. And um and so it's always about the art, you know, and it's always about the message and it's always about what the particular person has to say and their lived experience and how that becomes distilled through their writing. And think that that's something that's not necessarily unique to poetry, but the degree to which it becomes an art, I think, is something that's unique to poetry. I don't know if that's even an
Yeah,
answer to your
no, I
question
actually
or
think
just
that's a
rambling,
great
but
answer. Did you have anything to add to that, Gwen? I know that I jumped that hard question in at the end. We have about probably about 6 or 7 minutes left, so I'll let you answer, and then if either of you had anything else you wanted to read.
Oh, I just think that it offers writers of whatever level an opportunity to really to condense down to what's core, what's essential, and to really have those that offering in a smaller form, whether they're using a standard form of poetry or more of lyrical free write prose to I was thinking of like a just like a protein bar, like here it is
Yeah,
to
yeah,
power
that's a
you
good
through,
analogy.
right?
Yeah. Did you have anything else that you wanted to read, William?
um yeah, I'll read. My
Okay.
poetry lately is really very short. And I'm finding that I'm really enjoying being able to like be very expansive in a very small space. And I worked on a project just recently. I did a workshop with Matthias Felina, and it was like it wasn't necessarily like a craft workshop, but it was like a daily writing workshop where we were accountable to each other once a week. And, you know, shame on you if you didn't get 7 days worth of writing in the past.
Yeah.
And I came out of it with like, somehow I managed to come out of it with like 70 some odd poems, all the same title, all along the same coherent theme. And they're all these little kind of epistolary poems to things or places or people that I've lost or that have lost me over the years. And they kind of all started as kind of like a kernel or little seed of what I would say to those things. And so I'll just read one of them. They're very short. Um, they're all titled Dear Dead Garden. Dear Dead Garden, your voice, I hear the field it is. Every time is an outfit that we slip on. One wave every couple seconds says goodbye, sea. And that's it. They're
That's a
super
very
short.
cool idea. I like that. That concept is really interesting.
Thank you.
Did you have anything else that you wanted to read tonight, Gwen?
Sure. The one of my closing poems from the book is I think of having the honor and privilege of traveling to different places and meeting poets and writers and people from other countries. Of they're always like, Gwendolyn, come in, have tea, have un cafecito. And so I wish that for us, for welcoming people from around the world and from different places, that we can also gift our poetry in that way. So this piece is called What Counts is Your Practice of Hospitality. 6 by 8 inches, cold press finish. Pen and ink first, then watercolor wash. Squares of black around the edges. A cup of sweet hot tea in Istanbul. Chocolate caliente and churros in Mexico City. Tea with milk and honey in Minneapolis. Small bare feet on a hand-woven Persian rug. Burnt red, gold, oat-colored fringes. A postcard arrives in the mail from Tijuana. A message from the borderlands. Dearest Calliope, beautiful little star, we have not forgotten you.
That is a very good way to end tonight. Thank you so much to both of you. This was really fun. Just wanted to let everybody else know that's watching this. We're recording this live on Zoom. We are working on seeing if we can do some stuff with Zoom that other people can participate in. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching tonight, and see you all later.
And thank you to Vintage
Thank you.
Books. Yes, thank you so much.